think God really meant it when he said through David in the Psalms that the earth was his and the fullness thereof? Or you remember when Paul said in Colossians that Christ was above all things and in him all things hold together? Did he really mean all things? I mean, we know Christ is above the church, right? And above missions and above spiritual activities like, helping the poor, and certainly our personal moral decisions like our marriages and things like that. But all things? I mean, what about all that secular stuff? Like, is God over our neighborhoods? I mean, is he really over economics and business, and politics and commerce and government and entertainment and the arts? Is he above all those things also? The Romans had some strange names that they called early Christians. They called them atheists and cannibals, and they even accused them of incest. Now, why did they do this? Well, they called them atheists because Christians rejected the rest of the Roman pantheon. They believed in one God, not all the other gods that the Romans believed in and worshipped. And the God that Christians did believe in supposedly became a man, just like they were men. And his name was Jesus, and this was who this God was. They called them cannibals because at their secret meetings, those Christians would eat his flesh and drink his blood. Now, we know what that's referring to, communion, but they thought that was really strange. And they accused them of incest because also at these strange meetings, and when they would see other Christians around, they referred to them as brothers and sisters. And that was strange for them because that wasn't part of the Roman worship experience. But there was something else behind the Roman confusion about who the Christians were and what they believed and how they practiced their religion. You see, in the Roman mindset, which was borrowed heavily from the Greek mindset, anything spiritual was transcended. It was the process of leaving this world and going to a new state of mind or a new state of existence. And so even the eating of food was this idea of this food sacrifice to the gods, or the temple prostitutes. The act of sexuality itself was an attempt through orgasm to ascend to a new realm of existence. But see, Christianity turned that on its head. And Christianity, the experience of God, is not us going to a new realm. It's that this God has come to our world in flesh and in blood. And he has actually asked us to remember who he was. And he actually said we could call him brothers. So as he's on his throne up in heaven, we are his brothers and sisters. And so therefore we're brothers and sisters with each other. It was a completely new way of seeing religion and spirituality. And it impacted not only what the early Christians believed and how they practiced their particular rituals, it actually changed how they lived their life. And so the Romans, if they had a girl that they didn't want, a little baby girl, they would just throw her out into the woods and expose her. But the Christians said, no, that life is valuable here now. And they would go collect her, right? They would help the sick. When everybody else ran away from the plagues, they stayed in the muck and the mire of the dirt of this world. In fact, when Justin Martyr writes his first defense of the Christians to the Roman authorities, he says, listen, you don't want to kill these Christians. They're the best citizens you've got. Peter Leithart, writing a few years ago in Touchstone magazine, described how big of a switch this was from the way Romans saw spirituality. He wrote, instead of ascending past sensible things to the intellectual realm to find God, Christians said that God could be found in this world, since he had made himself known in flesh and continues to give himself in water and wine, bodies and bread. In other words, he writes, those early Christians were so earthly minded they could be no heavenly good. We often think of it the other way around, don't we? That Christians are so heavenly minded, they can be no earthly good. But the Christians that have always made an impact in the world around them are the ones that have sought to bring the reality of the redemption in the here and now, in the relationships and in the cultural structures and in the other individuals that they meet. In fact, you can think about William Wilberforce, right? He looks around and sees a great national sin of slavery. And he realizes that his nation needed not only repentance, but they needed renewal of their minds. They needed to think a different way about these African slaves, who for the British weren't as valuable as sugar. And so through a number of different ways, he brings a renewing of the way that they thought about the Africans, and it led to repentance. You also have those that work in families that are impacted by divorce, and they bring reconciliation to those families. And it's interesting because that gives us a model. You've heard me say renewal and repentance and reconciliation. We also have restoration. We also have redemption. All the words that Paul uses in the New Testament for the gospel are RE words. And so what it means to be engaged in our culture in a redemptive way is to look around and think, which word applies here? Do we have wrong thinking? We need a renewal of the mind. Do we have sin? We need repentance. Do we have relational brokenness? We need reconciliation. It's like the church up in Portland, Oregon, who looked at a local school that was suffering and broken, and they said it needs to be restored. And so the church turned out in droves to restore that school. Kip Jacobs is the pastor of that church out in Portland, Oregon. He's going to be our guest April 26th to 28th at this year's Wilberforce Weekend. Another pastor, Chris Brooks, is in Detroit trying to figure out how to bring redemption to his city. We're also going to have guys like Darrow Miller, who's trying to bring redemptive thinking to community development in impoverished nations of the world, and Cameron Doolittle and Emily Colson, who are trying to bring redemptive thinking in the area of disabilities and families struggling because they have a disability in their home. This conference is going to be about that very thing that we've been talking about. How do we think redemptively about the space that's all around us so that we can redeem every square inch? For Reengage, I'm John Stone Street.